Good morning, everyone. Welcome to UUCC, the UU Church of Canandaigua. I'm Eileen, I'm your minister. I'm so glad to be with you today and also to welcome Nora Bradbury-Haehl, our guest preacher this morning. Nora is a local interfaith activist, a longtime youth minister. My kids are making a lot of noise right now, but that's church these days. I mean, honestly, that's church at all times. They make a lot of noise in the sanctuary too. Nora is an interfaith activist locally. She is a longtime youth minister, and she's the author of 2 books about coming of age while maintaining your spiritual center: The Freshman Survival Guide, and a recent publication, The 20-Something Handbook. I have a few quick announcements to share with you today. The first is that our June worship schedule looks a little different from how things have been. And I know June seems really far away. It snowed the other day, but it's coming. And so we just want to start getting that schedule out there so folks aren't taken aback and don't miss a worship that they really want to come to. So there's a few things different in June. On Sunday the 13th, the second Sunday of June, we're going to have our annual meeting, our annual congregational meeting, where we vote on nominees to our board, where we vote on our annual budget. And so I want to encourage everyone to come on the 13th. If you're a member, you get to vote to decide how we spend our resources and what we do with our time. On June 20th, we are hoping we're going to be able to do a drive-in flower communion service in our parking lot. We'll stream it to YouTube live if you can't make it or you don't feel like it's quite safe for you to be somewhere in public yet. So we'll keep you updated on that, weather pending, virus pending. We're hopeful we can meet in person in our cars, in our parking lot on June 20th. And then on June 27th, UUs from around the country are going to gather together for worship as part of the virtual General Assembly of UU congregations. That service, we're going to send the link out to in our newsletter, but that service is going to be at noon so that we can accommodate our West Coast UU friends so that they don't have to get up at 6 a.m. to worship. So you all could sleep in and come to worship at noon on June 27th. And with that, let's take a deep breath in and let's enter a space of worship. Let's light our chalices together. So if you've got a chalice or any old candle nearby, I invite you to light it as we say our chalice lighting words. We gather this hour as people of faith with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning and celebration of the life we share together. And now I want to introduce Nora Bradbury-Haehl to you.
Good morning. I'm so happy to be with you this morning. Listen, can you hear it? The Spirit is calling. It calls us in the silence and through the noise and busyness of our daily lives. It calls us in the brightness of the day and the darkness of the night, in times of hope and despair. Listen, can you hear it? The Spirit is calling. It doesn't matter what you call it, for it has no name and has many different names. The Spirit of life, the Spirit of love, the Spirit of compassion, the Spirit of hope, the Spirit of justice. Listen, can you hear it? The Spirit is calling. It's calling to you and to me. It's calling us to greater wholeness, greater connection, greater service, greater love. It's calling us to heal the brokenness within ourselves, in others, and in the world. It's calling us to live more deeply, It's calling us to beauty. It's calling us to laugh and dance and sing. It's calling us to live through life's pain and sorrow. It's calling us to live courageously and kindly, to speak our truth in love, and to bend the moral arc of the universe toward justice. It's calling us into community. It's calling us into the greater life of all. Listen, can you hear it? The Spirit is calling. I'd like to invite everybody to join now from your own home in our opening hymn, This Little Light of Mine. And my own history is that we bring our light with us and we wave it around on the refrain. So I hope we'll see some waving lights too when we get there.
Let it shine, this little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine, this little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Building up a world, I'm gonna let it shine. Building up a world, I'm gonna let it shine. Building up a world, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Let it shine, this little light of mine. Well, I'm gonna let it shine, this little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
It's very hard not to smile when I sing that song. I'm going to try something a little bit different this morning with the story for all ages. And we're gonna try to tell the story together. I thought when my youngest, I have 4 kids, when my youngest left elementary school, that I was done with my days of knowing every Disney movie by heart, including words and dialogue. But it turns out not. I have a 3-year-old grandson now, and there's a new generation of Disney films to memorize. And so because we're talking about call today, I was hoping that we could tell the story of Moana together. Is there anybody, I want to invite people to use the chat box actively during our story. Is there anybody here today that knows the movie Moana at all? Okay, I see some nods. Eileen does. Okay. So Eileen has a couple of slides to help us tell the story. So Eileen, if you could pull up that first slide. Let's see. There we go. And so, so we're going to try to tell the story of Moana together. And let me see if I can still see the chat box while I've got that. Okay, there we go. So if there's anybody on who could type in the chat box what's happening in this picture, in the story of Moana. Give everybody a minute to open their chat box and type in. So something's happening here between Moana and the ocean. All right. So yes, the Moana is discovering a strong connection to the waters of the ocean, and she's being called by the ocean. Those are great ways to describe what's happening there. So she's just a tiny little girl, and she toddles to the shore, but she has this encounter with the ocean in this picture, and it really shapes her whole life. It's going to make a big difference in the whole direction of her life. So so this is our main character in the story, and we already know that the ocean is going to be important to Moana. Let's go to the next slide, and there's some questions there, and you can type any of your responses to any of these questions in the chat at any point, but I'll lead us through the questions one by one. So anybody who knows the story of Moana, we already know that she's important in the story. She's the central figure in the story. But who are some of the other important characters in the story of Moana? Let's start telling the story together. So anybody who knows this story, you can type in the chat box and tell us what other characters you remember. So her family is important, somebody said. That's definitely true. Her family is very important. Does anybody remember who the specific people in her family are? So there's different characters within her family that have very special roles to play. So her grandmother. So Moana's grandmother, she calls herself the village crazy lady. At one point, I really identify with Moana's crazy grandmother, especially now that I'm a grandmother myself. I like that idea of being able to just do whatever I want and have people say, "Oh, she's just the crazy grandmother. She's the village crazy lady. That's what she does." And somebody else said Maui, who's the demigod of the earth and sea, the sea and sky, a hero to all. That's right. He's not just a hero to men; he's a hero to all. And he's very important as the story goes on. We like chicken. I like the chicken too. So Moana has a little friend, chicken, who comes along on her adventure with her when she responds to the ocean's call. That's good. So her grandmother is important. Does anybody remember anybody else in Moana's family that she has expectations of her? Does anybody remember? Oh, her father. Yes, her father. And what does Moana's father expect her to do? What does he want her to do? He sings a whole song at the beginning of the story about what he wants her to do. He wants her to lead the people. Yeah. And and lead the people, be the chief. Yep. And what does she have to do to be the chief? He keeps, through that whole first song, he keeps going to get Moana from one place and putting her in another when she's still small enough to do that. He follows her and he gets her back from where she's trying to go and brings her back to another place. Does anybody remember where she's trying to go? Yeah, her dad wants her to stay home. And she keeps running to the ocean that called her, right? So she's got this call from the ocean, and then the big conflict of the story. She goes to the water. She keeps going to the water. And her father wants her to stay safe and stay home and be the chief and lead the people. But a big part of what he expects her to do in that role is stay safe and stay home. That's exactly right. So let's go to the next slide. And we might have given away the question already on this one. You guys are good at telling this story with me. Thank you. I really appreciate it. I wasn't sure if the participation part would work, but I especially appreciate all of you who know this movie by heart and have watched it 1,000 times. Oh, there. One more back from there. The slide that says at the top, yes, the water's edge. So we talked about her dad wants her to stay on the island, but her grandma tells her, and this is a very specific question, so if people don't know this right off the bat, that's okay. But her grandma tells her, you may hear, does anybody know what that line in the song is? What does her grandma tell her that she might hear? It starts with a V. The word starts with a V. I'm watching the chat. There, yes. You might hear a voice inside you, she tells her. So that's part of the ocean's call, right? That Moana's grandmother teaches her to listen for the voice inside that calls her to something else. She says, your dad wants you to stay here, and you should mind your father. She makes sure to point that out. But you may hear a voice that calls you to something else, and so that's an important idea to keep in mind. The whole line is, mind what he says, but remember, you may hear a voice inside, and if the voice starts to whisper to follow the farthest star, Moana, that voice inside is who you are. And so we're going to talk a little bit more later on about the idea of call, and who we are and what we're called to. But for me, that's one of the most important parts of the story, is listening to that inner voice that we have, and learning to trust it, learning to listen carefully, learning to trust it, and understanding that even though there may be people who want other things of us, that voice, our own inner voice, is who we each are. So let's talk quickly about the rest of the story. Could we go to the next slide? And so these are just a couple of other important ideas about the story. I think we talked about how she's greeted by the ocean. And when Moana sings her own song, she says, the line where the sea meets the sky, it calls me. So that her whole song is just full of that idea of being called. And then what's she called to? She's supposed to find Maui, sail across the sea, and restore the heart of Te Fiti. And even though it's very hard and there's some very sad parts to the story and some very scary parts to the story, it's not easy, right? But she's also not alone. So Maui helps her, and also the spirit of her grandmother helps to guide her. And throughout, she listens to that inner voice, and she keeps her grandmother and her people in her mind and in her heart. And she's able to restore the heart of Te Fiti, which brings new life, and now there's her whole people has a new way of life because she discovered that they were voyagers, and because Moana trusts her own call and that voice inside her, the whole way of life of her people, they return to their previous way of life of being voyagers instead of just staying safe on their island. So, is there anything else before we leave the story? Is there anything else that anybody wanted to say in the chat box about the story? What was your favorite part? Did anybody else have a favorite character? We like the chicken. He's very funny. He's very awkward. I love awkward chickens. Is there anything else that people liked about the story that they wanted to mention before we end? One of the things I like about Moana is when she flips her very curly hair, it swings around and smacks her in the face. And as a curly haired person, seeing a hero on screen that has hair that's a little bit out of control most of the time, I really appreciated that. And I could identify with Moana on that. So, all right. Thank you, everybody, for participating in the story. That was really fun to do. I'm going to mute now and give you back to Reverend Eileen.
Now is the time in our service where we share our joys and our sorrows with one another. In our celebrations and in our pain, we are a community that holds one another. So whatever deep, big feelings in your heart you carry with you this morning, know that we are with you. I want to ask you to use the chat to share what joys and sorrows lie in your hearts this morning. And I will begin by sharing the joy I'm sure we are all sharing in, the gratitude we have for our member Marty Dodge and the abundance of daffodils he's brought to the church, which you can look at while we share the rest of our joys and sorrows this morning. We're holding so much today. We're celebrating Carrie on her birthday, joy for hiking and all of the outdoor activity that's available to us now as spring truly unfolds. We're holding Jeff's family in our thoughts as they struggle with a new normal. We are celebrating a new granddaughter for Lynn. So much joy at gardening and eco meditation. We're thinking of Carrie's nephew and Pat's sister-in-law. We are grateful for vaccines and still carry a lot of anxiety about COVID-19. We're struggling to parent and work from home. We're thinking of our migrant worker siblings and of Scarlett's son. And for all these joys and sorrows and the joys and sorrows left in the silence of our hearts, we are with one another. I want to invite you now into the spiritual practice of generosity. In our congregation, we promise that in the service of the values that unite us, we will recognize the inherent value of each person, foster a community of compassion and caring for all, value our diverse opinions, and engage respectfully in all our interactions. It is the generosity of our members that supports the good work of our congregation that helps us live into that promise. And now is the time for us to share in that generosity. We share a quarter of our monthly offering each month with a local service partner who shares our values. And this month, we're sharing our offering with Sunrise Movement, the Rochester chapter, a youth movement to stop climate change. And there are a few ways that you could give to this morning's offering. You can give online at canandaiguauu.org/connect. You can mail a check to the church at 3024 Cooley Road, or you could set up automatic recurring giving with your bank. And in any of these cases, we ask that you make a note with your gift that you intended to be part of this morning's offering so that we can share a quarter of it with our service partner. All those ways of giving you can see in your chat, including a link, and we thank you for your generosity.
I'd like to invite you now into a time of centering and shared silence. And wherever you are, find a comfortable, grounded way to sit. If you're on your couch or at your desk, it can be a little trickier, but feel your feet on the ground and feel the weight of your body wherever you're seated. And I invite you to become aware of your breath. Breathe in and feel the air in your lungs. Breathe out and maybe release some of the tension of the day. Breathe in again and release. One more big calming breath. And let go anything that doesn't feel great right now. I want to share with you part of an essay by Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes. She's a post-trauma recovery specialist, a mestiza Latina. And this is taken from her essay, Letter to a Young Activist During Troubled Times. Do not lose heart. We were made for these times. She says, I have heard from so many recently who are deeply and properly bewildered. They are concerned about the state of affairs in our world now. Ours is a time of almost daily astonishment and often righteous rage over the latest degradations of what matters most to civilized, visionary people. You are right in your assessments. The luster and hubris some have aspired to while endorsing acts so heinous against children, elders, everyday people, the poor, the unguarded, the helpless, is breathtaking. Yet I urge you, ask you, gentle you, to please not spend your spirit dry by bewailing these difficult times. Especially do not lose hope, most particularly because the fact is that we were made for these times. Yes, for years we have been learning, practicing, been in training for, and just waiting to meet on this exact plane of engagement. I grew up on the Great Lakes and recognize a seaworthy vessel when I see one. Regarding awakened souls, there have never been more able vessels in the waters than there are right now across the world. And they are fully provisioned and able to signal one another as never before in the history of humankind. Look out over the prow. There are millions of boats of righteous souls on the waters with you. Even though your veneers may shiver from every wave in this stormy royal, I assure you that the long timbers composing your prow and rudder come from a greater forest. That long-grained lumber is known to withstand storms, to hold together, to hold its own, and to advance regardless. In any dark time, there is a tendency to veer toward fainting over how much is wrong or unmended in the world. Do not focus on that. There is a tendency, too, to fall into being weakened by dwelling on what is outside your reach, by what cannot yet be. Do not focus there. That is spending the wind without raising the sails. Ours is not the task of fixing the entire world all at once, but of stretching out to mend the part of the world that is within our reach. Any small, calm thing that one soul can do to help another soul, to assist some portion of this poor, suffering world, will help immensely. It is not given to us to know which acts or by whom will cause the critical mass to tip toward an enduring good. One of the most calming and powerful actions you can do to intervene in a stormy world is to stand up and show your soul. Soul on deck shines like gold in dark times. The light of the soul throws sparks, can send up flares, builds signal fires, causes proper matters to catch fire. To display the lantern of soul in shadowy times like these, to be fierce and to show mercy towards others, both are acts of immense bravery and greatest necessity. Struggling souls catch light from other souls who are fully lit and willing to show it. If you would help to calm the tumult, this is one of the strongest things you can do. There will always be times when you feel discouraged. I too have felt despair many times in my life, but I do not keep a chair for it. I will not entertain it. It is not allowed to eat from my plate. The reason is this. In my uttermost bones, I know something, as do you. It is that there can be no despair when you remember why you came to earth. I hope you will write this on your wall. When a great ship is in harbor and moored, it is safe. There can be no doubt. But that is not what great ships are built for.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea. In the land, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
I'm going to begin with a story about a member of my family that I'm going to ask Eileen to bring up a picture of right now, just so you can see who I'm talking about as I tell this story. There. And Eileen, if you can take the picture down after I finish the story about Sam. Okay. A few years ago, we took a family vacation to the Adirondacks. I had some anxiety about going. Normally, on the rare occasions that we travel, our pets stay home. We've usually had too many animals to consider bringing them along anyway. You may have heard that my husband calls our house Nora's Ark. At that point, our very high energy 80-pound Labrador Retriever mix, Sam, who you see in the picture, was about 1.5 years old. Greg, my husband, who has been knocked flat by Sam more than once, has often commented that sooner or later he's bound to be killed in a lab accident. So Sam was used to having his people around, and I was nervous about how he'd do if someone was just stopping by to feed him and wasn't staying at the house with him. Would he eat all the socks or just some of them? Our friend who was dog sitting couldn't cover the whole week. We'd be gone, but my sister happened to be traveling near where we were staying and offered to bring him to us there. I was a little concerned about how he'd be by the lake. He'd never been near water before, except to have the mud washed off him in the bathtub, which is a fairly frequent need. His response to water in that situation was always an active and emphatic, "No, thank you." So Sam arrived at the lake, and in short order, we had him down at the beach. The family was already swimming, and he observed them with concern as he paced back and forth along the shore. The kids called him and tried to get him to come into the water, but he wasn't at all sure it was safe. Then somebody pulled out the secret weapon, a ratty old foam football they'd found in the boathouse. It turns out that when you bring a retriever to water, instinct is stronger than fear. Sam saw the ball go, and he leapt in the water like he was born to do it. From that moment, it was as if he discovered he could fly. Sam spent the rest of that day, and the next day, and the day after that, in the water until he'd worn out each family member's throwing arm, and then he'd joyfully collapse in the sun. The dog, who had always had too much energy, had finally exhausted himself doing what he was made to do. People love a good call story, the tale of an often unlikely someone being beckoned into the role they were made for. The Jewish and Christian scriptures are full of these stories: Abraham and Sarah, Moses, Samuel, Esther, Mary, John the Baptist. The disciples at the seashore drop their nets and leave their father sitting alone in the boat when they are called. Sometimes it doesn't happen so quickly as it did with Sam the dog, or as dramatically as with Moana the Disney character. Often the call manifests not as some beautiful dream, but instead as discomfort or nervousness, restlessness, dissatisfaction, standing at the water's edge and wanting something more. In Moana's story, her call brings her into conflict with her father and the roles that she's expected to play. The lyric in her struggle anthem, "I wish I could be the perfect daughter, but I come back to the water no matter how hard I try." I remember years ago, a young person who had been in my youth group, Courtney, came to me asking for help while she was in college. She needed to talk through the uncomfortable conversation she was about to have with her parents about changing her major. Her folks wanted her to be an engineer, a nice, solid, safe path of study and career. But as she studied, she became aware of the, at the time, fairly new field of environmental engineering. She knew almost immediately that that was where she belonged. She knew that was the difference she wanted to make in the world. Looking back now, it's clear to see, after several AmeriCorps commitments and a career in recycling, developing environmental education programs, and working with corporations on sustainable practices, it's obvious that that was Courtney's call. But at its beginning, it was full of uncertainty and discomfort. Much of my time and energy since I saw you last has been devoted to writing and editing a book. And if I'm being honest, a lot of that time was spent fretting and crying and watching deadlines fly by me and questioning myself and everything that I thought I knew. But the book for young adults came out last month. The final chapter talks a little bit about call. It's written for 20-somethings, but no matter our age, we all still have a call. So perhaps there's something here for each of us. Let your life speak. The writer, Parker Palmer, tells of discovering this old Quaker saying as a young man. Initially, he thought it was about living up to the demanding standards of the highest truths he could find. Over time, and after spending a great deal of energy doing what he thought he was supposed to do, he came to a very different conclusion about those words. His revised understanding is gentler, truer, and wiser. He came to understand "let your life speak" to mean, before you tell your life what you intend to do with it, listen for what it intends to do with you. Before you tell your life what truths and values you have decided to live up to, let your life tell you what truths you embody, what values you represent. Let's take a look at where you are right now and where you'd like to be. What does your life tell you? To answer that question, consider questions like this. What do you love? What are you good at? What don't you mind working hard to get good at? If someone who didn't know you looked at your life from the outside, how you've spent your time so far, what you've done for work and fun, who you spend your time with, what you talk about, read about, care about, what values might they say you represent? And what are you trying to accomplish in your life? What matters to you, and why does it matter? And to answer all of those questions, think about some of these questions. What are your core values? What do you believe? What do you have energy for? What conclusions have you come to about the world and your place in it? What conclusions have you come to about yourself? We talk both about being called to do something, to take up a commission, and also having a calling to be something. As people committed to social justice, we are called individually and communally, as the essay we just read says, to stand up and show your soul. When we listen for our call and respond to it, we show our soul. Struggling souls, Dr. Estes says, catch light from other souls who are fully lit and willing to show it. If you would help to calm the tumult, this is one of the strongest things you can do. So for our benediction, I want to use a few more of the words from that essay. One of the most calming and powerful actions you can do to intervene in a stormy world is to stand up and show your soul. To display the lantern of soul in shadowy times like these, to be fierce and to show mercy towards others, both are acts of immense bravery and greatest necessity. I hope you will write this on your wall. When a great ship is in harbor and moored, it is safe. There can be no doubt. But that is not what great ships are built for. Please join in our closing hymn, Though I May Speak with Bravest Fire.
may speak with bravest fire and have the gift to all inspire, and have not love, my words are vain as sounding brass and hopeless gain. Though I may give all I possess, and striving so my love profess, but not begin my love within, the prophet soon turned strangely thin. Come, Spirit, come, our hearts control. Our spirits long to be made whole. Let inward love guide every deed. By this we worship and are freed.
Let's extinguish our chalices now. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.